Okay, so you guys have sent in some really interesting stuff about this idea of learning by explaining even when there's no one around to hear you,
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept, right?
like talking yourself through your notes,
Yeah.
or even like rehearsing a presentation when you're completely alone in a room,
hmm
basically explaining something out loud, even though there's no actual audience listening.
Yeah, it's something I think a lot of us do naturally when we're trying to learn something new.
Right, it's like that instinct to teach, even when there's no student. And
Exactly.
that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today, this idea of learning by non-interactive teaching.
I love that term, non-interactive teaching.
Yeah, it sounds kind of funny when you say it out loud.
It does, but it really captures this idea of teaching when there's no one there to interact with.
Right. It's a solo study method that many of us use probably without even realizing it.
hmm
So our goal today is to unpack that and figure out what's really going on when we do this.
And what's really interesting from the research review you sent over is that uh, a lot of studies do show that this can be a really effective way to learn,
Yeah.
but there's also a whole bunch of evidence that suggests it doesn't always work, and sometimes it can even backfire.
Interesting.
So our mission for today is to try to get a clearer picture of when and why this whole explaining to a non-audience thing actually helps you learn.
I'm into it.
Now, the review you shared lays out a nice framework for thinking about this, and it identifies three main perspectives on why this non-interactive teaching might actually work.
Okay. So what are those three?
So first off, we've got retrieval practice.
Retrieval practice. Okay.
And the idea here is that the simple act of trying to recall the information to explain it is like a mental workout for your memory.
Okay. So just the act of digging it out to explain it makes it stick better.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
Then there's generative processing, which takes us a step further.
Yeah.
So this goes beyond just remembering the facts. It's about actively making sense of the material, connecting the dots, elaborating on it so it makes sense to your imaginary listener.
So you're not just spitting out info. You're actually working with it.
Exactly, you're building a deeper, richer understanding.
I like it.
And finally, there's the idea of social presence.
Ooh, social presence. This sounds juicy.
It's a really fascinating perspective that suggests that even the idea of an audience, even if it's just in your imagination, can actually influence how you process information.
That's so wild.
Well,
No, I kind of get it, though. Like, if I think I'm explaining something to someone else, I might try harder to make it clear.
Precisely, and we'll dig into all the nuances of that later, but let's start with this retrieval practice idea.
Okay, let's go back to basics. So when we talk about retrieval practice, what are we really saying here?
Well, the fundamental idea is that when you're trying to explain something, you're forcing your brain to dig that information out of storage, right?
Right. It's not just sitting there passively.
Alright.
You may have to actively retrieve it.
Exactly, and that act of retrieval strengthens those connections in your brain, what we call memory traces.
It's like building a stronger pathway to that information.
Exactly. Think of it like a trail in the woods. The more you walk it, the clearer and more defined it becomes.
Okay, I like that analogy.
And as you retrieve that information, you're also building new ways to get to it later, what we call retrieval cues.
Put more landmarks on that trail.
Exactly. You got it. And there's some really interesting research that supports this idea.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
So there's a study by Coe and colleagues back in 2018,
Okay.
and they compared non-interactive teaching with straightforward retrieval practice.
So, like, just trying to write down everything you remember.
Yeah, exactly. And what they found was pretty interesting. The benefits of both methods were pretty similar.
So, explaining and just recalling were about equally good for learning.
In this study, yeah, but there was a really important detail in that study that we can't overlook.
Ooh, what was it?
They actually had a third group in that study,
Okay.
and this group simply read a teaching script out loud.
So they were explaining the information, but they didn't have to recall it themselves.
Exactly, and that's the key difference.
So they weren't doing that active retrieval.
Nope, and that group didn't see the same benefits as the other two.
Ah, interesting. So it really does seem like it's that act of recalling that matters.
That seems to be the big takeaway here. The act of retrieving the information to explain it is what's really driving those learning benefits.
So it's not just about talking, it's about thinking about it in a way that forces you to remember it.
Precisely. And that co-study, that third group, they highlight that just vocalizing the information isn't enough.
It's got to be that active recall, that mental struggle of pulling it out of your brain.
Yeah, you need that to kickstart that memory strengthening process.
But even though the benefits of explaining with retrieval and just retrieving were similar in that study,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that explaining is just retrieval in disguise, right?
That's a great point.
Uh-huh.
It could be that something else is happening when we try to teach even to that imaginary audience.
Which brings us to our second idea, Generative processing.
Oh yeah, generative processing. This is where things get even more interesting.
Okay, so remind me again, what is generative processing all about?
It's about going beyond just remembering the facts. It's about engaging with the material on a deeper level,
Okay.
organizing it in your mind, making connections, and elaborating on it to make it understandable to someone else, even if that someone else isn't really there.
So it's like you're building a mental model of the information.
Exactly. And the research suggests that this kind of active processing leads to a much richer and deeper understanding.
Cool. So are there any studies that show this generative processing in action?
There are actually several that the review highlights.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about them.
So, for instance, Jacob et al. In 2020 and Lackner and colleagues in 2020 and 2018, they all found that explaining to a non-audience was more effective for learning than just trying to recall the information.
More effective even than just retrieval practice.
Exactly, which suggests there's something more going on than just the benefits of retrieval alone.
So what could that something more be?
Well, when you're explaining, you're likely engaging in what we call generative activities.
Okay.
Actively trying to make sense of the information through things like drawing inferences that weren't explicitly stated or elaborating on key ideas with your own examples or connections.
So you're going beyond the basic facts. You're trying to figure out the why and the how and make it all fit together.
Exactly. You're building a more complete and integrated understanding.
And it seems like this kind of generative processing wouldn't just help you understand the material itself better. It might also improve your metacognitive skills, right?
You're absolutely right.
That whole thinking about thinking thing, being aware of what you know and what you don't know.
Exactly. And the review actually mentions a couple of studies that looked at this specifically.
Oh, tell me about them.
So Fukaya in 2013 and Jacob et al. Again in 2020, they found that people were better at judging their own understanding after they had explained the material to a non-audience.
Makes sense. If you stumble while you're trying to explain something, you realize, oh, maybe I don't get this as well as I thought.
Precisely, it forces you to confront the limits of your own knowledge.
It's like trying to teach someone a dance move and realizing halfway through, oh, wait, I'm not even sure how to do this step myself.
I love that analogy. It perfectly captures the idea that trying to convey information to someone else, even an imaginary someone else,
Yeah.
can really make you aware of where the gaps in your own understanding are.
So it's like a built-in self-assessment tool.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly valuable for guiding your further learning.
Cool. So we've got retrieval practice, the act of recalling the information, and now generative processing, this deeper level of engagement and sense-making.
Yep. And both of those seem to play a role in why explaining to a non-audience can be an effective learning strategy.
But we still have this third piece of the puzzle.
Right. Social presence.
Social presence. This is where things get really interesting. Okay, so break it down for me. How does the idea of an audience, even an imaginary one, factor into all of this?
So the social presence view basically suggests that the way you engage in those generative processes we just talked about
Right.
can actually be influenced by the feeling of having an audience, even if that audience only exists in your head.
Interesting. So like even just imagining someone is listening can change how you approach explaining the information.
Exactly. And this idea has a few different layers to it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So the first layer is called discourse pragmatics.
Discourse pragmatics. Sounds fancy.
It is, but it's actually a pretty simple idea.
Okay.
It basically means that when we explain something to someone, we naturally tailor our explanation to who we think we're talking to.
Like if I'm explaining something to a 5-year-old versus explaining it to an adult.
Exactly. You're going to adjust your language, the level of detail you provide, even the examples you use.
Right, you're trying to meet them where they're at.
Exactly. And the key point here is that this act of anticipating your audience's needs and adapting your explanation can actually lead you to generate more elaborations and make more connections than you might if you were just talking to yourself without considering another perspective.
So you're putting yourself in their shoes, trying to see the information through their eyes.
Precisely. And that
Right.
can trigger a whole new level of thinking and understanding.
And the review contrasts this with something called egocentric self-explaining.
Yeah, which is when you're really just focused on your own understanding and not really thinking about how someone else might perceive it.
So it's like you're just talking to hear yourself think.
In a way, yeah. And the research suggests that that might not be as effective for learning.
Because you're not putting in that extra effort to make it clear for someone else.
That's the idea. But there is actually a study that complicates this picture a bit.
Oh, what's that?
It's a study by Roscoe and Shi back in 2008, and what they found was kind of surprising.
Lay it on me.
They found that explaining to a non-audience was actually less effective than self-explaining.
Really?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive to everything we've been talking about, right?
Totally.
But the key here might be the timing of when the explaining happened in that study.
The timing. Okay.
So the students who were self-explaining were doing it while they were studying the material.
So they were talking themselves through it as they went.
Exactly like a running commentary on their understanding.
Interesting.
Whereas the non-interactive teachers in that study, they gave their explanations after they had already finished studying.
So there was a gap between learning and explaining.
Exactly, and that difference in timing could be really significant.
So maybe explaining while you're still in the process of learning is more beneficial.
That's one possibility, and it's definitely something that needs more research.
So the timing of when you do this explaining might be another factor to consider.
And just to add to the complexity, there was another study by Lackner et al. In 2021. They compared writing explanations to a non-audience with self-explaining, and they had mixed results.
Mixed results.
Yeah, sometimes explaining to that non-audience was better. Sometimes self-explaining was better. It wasn't a clear-cut pattern.
So it seems like the relationship between self-explaining and non-interactive teaching is a bit more nuanced than we might initially think.
Definitely a lot more to unpack there, but for now, let's move on to the second aspect of social presence.
Okay, what's next?
The affective perspective.
Affective perspective. So we're talking about feelings now.
Exactly. This is about how the feelings associated with social presence might actually be affecting us on a deeper level.
Okay, Emerson.
So the idea here is that the feeling of having an audience, whether real or imagined, can actually trigger physiological arousal.
Oh, so like our bodies are responding to this imagined social situation.
Precisely. Things like a slight increase in heart rate, or maybe even a bit of sweating.
Interesting. So we're not just thinking about it differently. Our bodies are actually reacting to it.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Oh.
There's a principle called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which suggests that a moderate level of arousal can actually be beneficial for performance.
So like a little bit of stress can help us focus,
Exactly. It can help you pay attention and even improve memory formation.
but too much stress and we freeze up.
Exactly, and that's the key point here.
Okay.
While studies have shown a link between explaining to a non-audience and increased arousal,
Okay.
they haven't consistently found a direct link to better learning outcomes.
So you might be feeling more alert and engaged, but it doesn't necessarily translate to better learning.
That's what the research suggests so far, at least.
Okay, so that feeling of being on the spot might make your brain a bit more active, but it's not a guarantee that you're going to learn more effectively.
Exactly. It seems like there's more to it than just that.
Okay. And what about the third aspect of social presence? What was it again?
The motivational one.
Motivational. Okay, so now we're talking about why we do things.
Exactly. This is about how the feeling of having an audience can influence our motivation to learn. So the idea here is that teaching, even to a fictitious audience, can actually be more engaging and enjoyable than other study methods.
Interesting. So it's not just about the cognitive benefits. There's an emotional component as well.
Exactly. It can feel more rewarding, more purposeful.
And that can make you want to put in more effort.
Precisely, you're more likely to stick with it and really try to understand the material.
It's like if you have to teach it, you really need to know it.
That's the classic motivation right there. And there's actually a field experiment with primary school students by Hugerheid and colleagues in 2019
Okay.
that provides some support for this idea.
What did they do?
They had students create a non-interactive teaching video,
Okay.
and they compared that to just restudying the material.
Got it.
And what they found was that the students who made the teaching videos actually performed better on a test afterwards.
Oh, wow. So even though they weren't actually teaching anyone,
Yeah, even though their audience was just a camera.
they still learned better.
Exactly. And they also found that those students reported enjoying the teaching activity more.
Makes sense. It's more active, more creative.
And it seems like that enjoyment actually played a role in the improved learning outcomes.
So feeling good about the learning process can actually boost your learning.
That's what the evidence suggests. But of course, we have to be cautious here and consider other explanations.
Like what?
Well, the review brings up the idea of a novelty effect.
Novelty effect.
Okay, so if creating a teaching video was a brand new and exciting activity for those students,
Yeah.
then that novelty alone could have been what drove that increased effort and enjoyment.
Right. It wasn't the act of teaching itself. It was just that it was something new and different.
That's the alternative explanation, and it's something we always have to keep in mind when we're interpreting research findings.
So the motivation boost could be real, but it could also be temporary.
Exactly. More research is needed to really tease apart those factors.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap. We've got retrieval practice, we've got generative processing, and we've got social presence with its 3 different layers. And it seems like all of these factors can play a role in why explaining to a non-audience can be an effective learning strategy.
Yeah, the evidence seems pretty strong that it's more than just retrieval
Right.
practice.
Those studies showing that explaining can be even better than just recalling the information really highlight the importance of those deeper generative processes.
And then social presence adds this whole other layer of complexity.
Yeah, too much focus on the social aspect might actually backfire.
Right. But the motivation that comes from feeling like you're teaching someone, even if that someone is just in your head, that could be a key driver of its effectiveness.
So it's this delicate dance between cognitive and motivational factors.
Exactly. And the research is still ongoing, trying to figure out exactly how all these pieces fit together.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are
Yeah.
lots of variables at play.
Absolutely, which is why it's so important to understand the specific situations where this strategy might be more or less effective.
And the review actually dives into that quite a bit, looking at what they call the boundary conditions.
The boundary conditions, yeah, these are the factors that can influence how well non-interactive teaching works.
So let's dig into those, starting with the difference between speaking and writing your explanations.
Okay, so this is an area where the research is actually pretty consistent.
Oh, really?
Yeah, several studies have found that speaking your explanations seems to lead to better learning outcomes than writing them down.
Interesting. So talking is better than writing in this case.
That's what the research suggests, and there are a few possible explanations for why that might be.
I'm all ears.
Well, one possibility is cognitive load.
Cognitive load. Okay, so like how much mental effort it takes.
Exactly. And for most people, writing is a more demanding task than speaking.
Yeah, you have to think about grammar and spelling and all that.
Right, whereas speaking is often more automatic,
Yeah.
more natural.
So maybe talking is just less taxing on our brains.
That could be part of it, but interestingly, most studies haven't found big differences in how mentally tiring people find speaking versus writing explanations to be.
Really? So
Mhm.
it's not just about effort.
It seems like there's more to it than that, and the social presence perspective offers another potential explanation.
Okay, let's hear it.
So the idea here is that writing might trigger a weaker sense of social presence compared to speaking.
Interesting. So even though you're imagining an audience, it feels less real when you're writing.
That's the thinking, and there's actually some evidence to support this.
So yeah.
So in several studies, researchers have looked at the use of personal pronouns like I and you in written versus spoken explanations,
Okay.
and they found that students who wrote their explanations used fewer personal pronouns compared to those who spoke.
So like they were less likely to say things like, I think this is important, or you might find this interesting.
Exactly, and those personal pronouns are often seen as a marker of how much you're considering an audience.
So the more I and you, the more you're thinking about that other person.
That's the general idea, and a study by Jacob et al. In 2020 actually found that the positive effects of speaking on learning could be partially explained by these differences in personal references.
Oh, wow. So using more of those I and you pronouns actually led to better learning outcomes.
It seems that way, and they also found that the students who spoke their explanations included more detailed ideas overall.
So they were elaborating more, making more connections.
Exactly, which suggests that speaking might just naturally engage that sense of explaining to someone else, even if that someone else is just in your head.
So the act of verbalizing might make it feel more like a real teaching situation.
And that might be what prompts those more detailed and audience-focused explanations.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like speaking is generally the way to go if you want to maximize the benefits of this non-interactive teaching technique.
That's what the research suggests. But what about the format of those spoken explanations?
Like audio only versus recording a video of yourself.
Yeah, does that make a difference?
It seems like video would be more engaging, right? Because you can see the person's facial expressions and body language.
Yeah, you'd think so. But surprisingly, the research doesn't really support that.
Really?
Yeah. 2 studies that directly compared audio and video recordings of spoken explanations found no significant difference in how much people learned.
Interesting. So it seems like the act of speaking itself is what matters most.
That seems to be the key takeaway. Whether or not your nonverbal cues are being captured doesn't seem to make a big difference.
Okay, so it's the audio that's doing the heavy lifting, not the visuals.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to another interesting question then.
What's that?
The level of social presence that the teaching task itself creates.
Oh, yeah, this is a really important point.
Can you have too much social presence even when you're explaining to a non-audience?
That's a great question, and the research suggests that you absolutely can.
Really? So more social presence isn't always better.
It seems like there's a sweet spot, and if you go beyond that, it can actually backfire.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this sweet spot.
So remember that Yerkes-Dodson law we talked about earlier?
The one about how a moderate level of arousal is good, but too much can be detrimental.
Exactly. Well, it seems like social presence might work in a similar way.
Oh, interesting.
So studies by Hugerheid-Renkel and their colleagues in 2020 found that when the teaching task created a very strong sense of social presence,
Like how?
like actually teaching a real person remotely via webcam.
Okay, so you're seeing and interacting with a real person.
Exactly. And in those cases, it actually hurt performance compared to just studying or even teaching to a fictitious person.
Whoa, that's really counterintuitive. I would have thought that teaching a real person would be the most effective.
You'd think so, right? But it seems like too much social pressure can actually be a distraction.
So it's like you're so focused on how you're coming across to the other person
Mm-hmm.
that you're not really engaging with the material as deeply.
Exactly. And this negative effect was especially pronounced for tasks that required applying the knowledge in new situations.
So it's like they were memorizing the information, but they weren't really understanding it.
Precisely, their knowledge wasn't as flexible or adaptable.
Interesting. Okay, so it seems like there's a Goldilocks zone for social presence.
Yeah, not too little, not too much, just right.
But how do you know when you've found that sweet spot?
That's a great question, and unfortunately the research isn't quite there yet.
Oh,
Many of the studies in this area haven't actually directly measured how much social presence participants felt.
so we're kind of inferring it based on the experimental setup.
Exactly, and that makes it tricky to draw firm conclusions about the optimal level of social presence.
Right. We need more research that specifically manipulates social presence and then measures its effects on learning.
Precisely, and there have been some attempts to do that.
Oh, yeah.
A study by Jacob et al. In 2021 tried to manipulate social presence by using different cues in a messenger chat.
Like what kind of cues?
Things like using more personal language or asking questions to the imaginary student.
Okay, so trying to make it feel more like a real conversation.
Exactly, and they did find that those cues led to changes in how personal the explanations were.
So the students were adapting their language to the perceived audience.
Yeah, but interestingly, it didn't actually impact their performance on a test.
So even though their explanations were more socially oriented, it didn't translate to better learning.
Not in that study, at least. So it seems like there's still a lot we don't understand about how social presence interacts with the cognitive processes involved in learning.
Definitely a fertile ground for future research.
Absolutely.
Okay, so finding that social presence sweet spot is a bit of a mystery for now.
Yeah, but it's an important mystery to solve if we want to really optimize this learning strategy.
Agreed. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about another potential factor,
What's that?
the timing of when you do this explaining.
The time. Oh, yeah, this is another crucial aspect that's often overlooked.
Because most studies follow a pretty standard pattern, right?
Study, then teach, then test.
Exactly. But what if the teaching phase happened at a different point in that process?
That's a great question, and there's growing evidence that the timing can actually make a big difference.
Really?
Yeah, so a couple of experiments by Lackner et al. In 2020 looked at this directly.
Okay, what did they do?
They had students either teach between 2 study sessions or wait until they had studied everything and then do their teaching.
So explaining in the middle of studying versus explaining at the end.
Exactly. And they found that explaining between the study sessions actually led to a better understanding of the material.
Oh, wow. So earlier is better in this case.
It seems that way, and they also found that this benefit was linked to an improvement in the students' ability to monitor their own understanding.
Metacognition again.
Exactly. So it seems like explaining earlier in the process helps you identify what you don't know.
So you can then focus on those areas in your subsequent studying.
Exactly. It's like doing a practice quiz halfway through studying to see which topics you need to spend more time on.
That's a really helpful way to think about it. So it's not just about explaining, it's about using that explaining to guide your further learning.
Precisely, it turns explaining into a diagnostic tool.
A way to assess your own understanding and identify your weak spots.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly valuable for making your study time more efficient.
I like it a lot. Okay, so we've got speaking versus writing. We've got the level of social presence and now the timing of the explaining. All these factors that can influence the effectiveness of non-interactive teaching.
And there's one more interesting question that we should touch on.
Oh, what's that?
The idea of a teaching expectancy effect.
Teaching expectancy effect. What's that all about?
It's the question of whether just expecting to teach something can actually change how you learn it.
Oh, interesting. So, like, if you know you're going to have to teach it later,
Yeah, does that make you study differently even if you don't actually end up teaching?
like you pay more attention or try to understand it more deeply?
Exactly. And there's been quite a bit of research on this, but the findings have been a bit mixed.
Mixed findings. Oh, that's always fun.
Yeah, so some studies have shown that if you study with the expectation that you'll have to teach the material later,
Okay.
you might learn it better compared to just studying for a test.
So that expectation can actually boost your learning.
That's what some studies suggest, but other studies haven't found a significant difference.
Really? So it's not a guaranteed effect.
It seems like any effective teaching expectancy is probably relatively small, and it might depend on how the study is designed.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of research looking specifically at whether expecting to teach amplifies the benefits of actually doing non-interactive teaching.
So, like, does that expectation make the explaining even more effective?
Exactly. And a study by Fiorella and Mayer in 2014 suggested that it does.
Okay.
They found that the positive effects of explaining were stronger when students had studied with the expectation of teaching.
Wow.
But that particular finding has been hard to replicate in other studies.
So it might be a real effect, but it's a subtle one.
That seems to be the case so far.
Okay, so while thinking that you might have to teach something might make you a bit more focused while you're studying, the real learning benefits still seem to come from the act of explaining itself.
That's the key takeaway.
Got it. Okay, so let's shift gears now and talk about another really important factor
Yeah.
that can influence how well this explaining strategy works.
What's that?
What you already know going into it, your prior knowledge.
Prior knowledge. Oh, yeah. This is a big one.
Because it seems pretty logical that if you don't have at least a basic grasp of the subject matter, you're not going to be able to explain it very effectively.
Exactly. Prior knowledge is a foundational element of learning in general.
Right, and it definitely plays a crucial role here.
Yeah, students who have very little prior knowledge might just not have enough information in their memory to even form a coherent explanation.
Like they're trying to build a house without any bricks.
I like that analogy, and the review actually mentions a few studies that have found this to be the case.
Which ones?
So there's one by Lackner et al. In 2020, another one by the same group in 2021,
Okay,
and one by Wassenberg et al. In 2020.
got it. And what did they find?
They all found that for learners with very low prior knowledge, non-interactive teaching was either comparable to or even less effective than simpler study strategies.
I guess rereading the material.
Yeah, and that makes sense because if you don't have the foundational knowledge, you're not going to be able to generate those elaborations and connections that make explaining so beneficial.
Right, it's like you're missing the ingredients to make a good cake.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the other end of the spectrum?
Mm-hmm.
Do people who already know a lot about a topic benefit as much from explaining it?
That's a great question, and the research here is a bit more nuanced.
Okay.
A study by Hugerheit et al. In 2019 found that students with lower initial conceptual knowledge actually benefited more from teaching examples than those who started with higher prior knowledge.
Really, so explaining helped the less knowledgeable students more.
That's what they found, and their interpretation was that the act of teaching might help those students make connections and build a deeper understanding that they wouldn't have achieved otherwise.
Interesting. So it's like explaining helps fill in those knowledge gaps.
That's the idea. But it's important to note that this finding hasn't been consistently replicated in other studies.
Oh, so we can't take it as gospel yet.
Exactly. But it does suggest that prior knowledge is a complex factor that interacts with the effectiveness of non-interactive teaching in ways that we still don't fully understand.
It's not just about how much you know, it's about how explaining helps you use and build on that existing knowledge.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about how much you know going into it.
Mm-hmm.
But the review also mentions that students' beliefs about their own abilities might play a role as well.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating aspect that goes beyond just the cognitive side of things.
Right, because how we feel about ourselves as learners can really impact our motivation and our effort.
Exactly. And a study by Jacob et al. In 2020 looked at this specifically focusing on academic self-concept.
Academic self-concept, so like how confident students are in their academic abilities.
Exactly. And what they found was really interesting. The students who had a lower academic self-concept actually seemed to benefit more from non-interactive teaching compared to those with a higher self-concept.
So the less confident students got more out of it.
That's what they found. And one possible explanation is that for those students who are less sure of themselves academically, the act of teaching a fictitious peer might feel like a more balanced exchange of knowledge.
Interesting. So it's not as intimidating as if they were teaching to a real expert.
That's the idea. They're both the teacher and the student are kind of on the same level.
And that might make them more comfortable and more willing to.